All right. Before we begin that discussion, we'd like to acknowledge that the project area that we're discussing is located on the unceded ancestral land and shorelines homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. Further, we understand that polluting, disruptive city infrastructure, both including the train tracks and freeways most relevant to this study, as well as treatment plants and heavy industry, have disproportionately affected Black, Indigenous, and persons of color communities over the last century or more of development in our city. We encourage you to keep these things in mind during our presentation and as we move forward with planning. While we tried to make sure that the presentations for both our Thursday workshop and today's would be identical, we're making that change to the breakout rooms for the English language rooms. And I also wanted to add something here in light of recent conversations I've had with community members over email and phone. On slide 11, we're going to discuss disparities in racial and social equity across our project area. I wanted to share that even through this short period of outreach planning and engagement, spanning the last 2 to 3 months, that our team has continued to observe and learn about inequities between our Dogpatch Potrero station option areas and those in the Bayview. We've noticed that attendance at these virtual workshops has generally skewed more towards those interested in the options for Dogpatch and Potrero, although there has been great feedback from community members about the Bayview station options, albeit fewer in number. We also noticed that of the many community-based organizations to which we reached out, most of those that had the bandwidth to respond to us were also in the northern station zones or were citywide or regional groups. We were invited to take part in the India Basin Day of Family Fun, which then had to be postponed due to weather damage at India Basin Shoreline Park in the recent Category 5 atmospheric river event. We've also heard that the Bayview community would like more hard copy or in-person outreach regarding this work, and that some members of the community have felt minimized or have strong feelings of distrust for the planning department, and that they would prefer to have been involved in discussing the station options earlier in a more collaborative process. We've learned from this that the impacts of severe weather, which we know is exacerbated by climate change, are already impacting southeastern San Francisco. We've also learned that a strategy that seems to work well in the Dogpatch Potrero zones has not had similar results in the Bayview zones, and that we need to do better. Thank you to those people that are challenging us and helping us understand where we're coming up short. We're working to make adjustments to do better, and we'll be happy to discuss those in the discussion portion of today's presentation. We want to hear from all community members interested in providing feedback on the proposed sites. As I've mentioned, videos of these meetings will be available in English, Cantonese, and Spanish at sfplanning.org/SERSS. We will continue to look for feedback via the project email, cpc.serss@sfgov.org, or leave us a voicemail at 415-593-1655. We will also be distributing paper versions of the presentation to community-based organizations and libraries, where community members can leave written comments, as well as sending them by email or leaving a voice message. Thank you for that. To discuss some background, I'll now hand it over to my colleague, Jesse Kaler, Rail Program Manager with the San Francisco County Transportation Authority, to share some background on these options.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. As we covered in the first round of outreach last month, many changes are underway or planned for the Caltrain corridor in San Francisco, including the electrification of the railroad beginning in 2024, and 2 planned tunnel projects that will put Caltrain underground, starting from initially the downtown rail extension project from 4th and King, extending through a new alignment to the Salesforce Transit Center, and eventually extending south from that location beneath Potrero Hill through the Pennsylvania Avenue Extension Project, or PAX. That PAX project could require the redesign or relocation of 22nd Street Station. The city also seeks to restore regional rail access to the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhoods, focusing on a station concept potentially at Oakdale Avenue, as previously discussed with the community, as well as looking at potential alternatives at Evans Avenue and Williams Avenue. Our meetings from round 1 were recorded in English, Spanish, and Cantonese, and you can watch them on the project website. To arrive at the 6 alternatives under discussion today, the project team, consisting of staff from San Francisco Planning, the County Transportation Authority, the MTA, and Caltrain, along with a strong consultant team, reviewed the project limits and city and system-wide constraints. For example, we knew that we were considering stations between the existing 4th and King station in Soma and the Bayshore station in the city of Brisbane. We also know from Caltrain's station design guidelines that future train stations need to be accessible and should have 1,000-foot platforms located on a straight segment of track. Next slide. Stations should also be approximately a mile from one another. Some of the station concepts we've studied would be below grade in a tunnel, some at or near current street level, while others could be elevated depending on the location. In the future, Caltrain will run much more frequent electrified service, and we still have to think about how the addition of 1 or 2 new stations would affect the rest of the system. Once we had the longer list of potential stations, we started to apply criteria more specific to the local context. We are going to click through lots of information in the next number of slides. We would be happy to come back to any of these maps during the question and answer section of today's meeting.
Thank you, Jesse. To start us off, we know that climate change will be a challenge going forward. Which station sites are vulnerable to rising seas? The pink line shows a worst case scenario for how far inland water could rise with storm surge by 2100. The options at Mariposa, Cesar Chavez, Evans, and Oakdale are in or close to the inundation zone in this worst case scenario. Next slide, please. How do existing bus and light rail services and infrastructure connect to these sites? We know that some services are easier to change than others. Bus routes can generally change and bicycle and pedestrian facilities can be added, but light rail cannot move as easily and all changes must compete for valuable resources. Meanwhile, it's not easy and sometimes not possible to change major natural or built barriers to mobility, such as hills, creeks, Interstate 280, or large industrial uses. These barriers affect how easy or difficult it is to access the different station options. This is slide 11, which I noted earlier is about considering racial and social equity. Which combination of stations equitably provides access for the most people to the most jobs? Which station options best address longstanding mobility inequities in Southeast San Francisco and connect financially isolated residents to opportunities up and down the peninsula? We've also learned that there can be inequities in process, such as the outreach process that we're undergoing right now, and that we need to be able to be flexible and make changes to our processes in order to address those inequities dynamically. Note that the area around Cesar Chavez, sorry, can you go back one slide? Thank you. Note that the area around Cesar Chavez and Evans is hatched in gray to protect the privacy of the small number of households in that zone. Thank you. Next slide. So once you layer on the existing land uses, you can see that each station option serves a different mix. Residential, shown in yellow, prominently surrounds Mariposa, 22nd, Oakdale, and Williams, while light industrial, shown in purple, is more common around the Cesar Chavez and Evans options. This next slide shows approved and planned developments that are under construction or expected in the future. At a high level, you can see high concentrations of housing planned around the Dogpatch Potrero options in the north, large commercial projects in the center of the map, and smaller residential and commercial projects in the Bayview neighborhood south of Oakdale and around Williams. These are just some of the maps that we've developed to inform our assessment of pros and cons for each alternative. In this next segment of the meeting, we can drill down further into individual sites and share some concept sketches of what various station options could look like. With that, I think I'll hand it over to Jesse to cover the Dogpatch Potrero station options. And then once actually, no, I'm going to pause and take public comment, which was requested before we dive into those. I'd like to open the floor for anybody who'd like to make a comment to the room. Please use the raise hand feature and we'll be happy to call on you. Go ahead, Teddy. I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for the meetings that you've been having. Thanks for the work that's been put on these projects. I'm coming from the Bayview neighborhood and dealing with residents and organizations in the Bayview, and we appreciate having a Caltrain station in the Bayview. I particularly appreciate the comments and the work that Anna, you just talked about regarding work with the Bayview community, the challenges and the needs to improve. On behalf of many in the Bayview community, I'd like to say that we do need solutions to the planning department's approach to the Bayview community. All of us are concerned about planning department outreach and the treatment of the Bayview neighborhood. I don't not think this is just a matter of one planner. I think Anna is trying, and I appreciate that very much. But I think as a policy matter, the planning department does need to review how they are working with the Bayview. It is an injustice to the Bayview community when you do the same outreach to the Dogpatch and Potrero Hill as you do to the Bayview. It does not work. You get different turnouts and skewed results. Again, Anna, I appreciate that you're beginning to see that happening, and it's not efficient. Lack of respect for the Bayview in the way that you do outreach is an injustice and results in unequal outcomes. Bayview has many disadvantages. We are the most underserved neighborhood. We have disproportionately high COVID infections, hospitalizations, and death. We have the lowest household incomes in San Francisco and some of the most toxic land in the city. But Bayview also has many advantages. We have the most diverse population in San Francisco. We have the best weather for growing produce and raising families. We have the biggest distribution center for fresh produce for the entire city. We also have the only USDA certified farm in San Francisco, the Florence Fang Community Farm, which I would like to speak about in my next portion. The planning department increases all of the inequalities and the disadvantages of the Bayview with wrong-headed policies that neglect the population and businesses of the Bayview. But the planning department also misses out on all the advantages that can help improve not just the Bayview, but can be extended to all families and businesses of San Francisco. I'm coming to understand that the Williams Street location is not affecting the Florence Fang Community Farm, but I had not been aware of that until now. And many in the community were worried that the Williams Avenue would hurt the farm. And in fact, we have collected 13 letters from organizations in the Bayview supporting the farm and asking the planning department to not infringe upon the farm. The letters come from Black churches, San Francisco's oldest Chinese political club, children youth centers, senior centers in the Bayview, job training organizations, local businesses, Bayview businesses, environmental advocacy groups, food access and nutrition access advocates, in San Francisco's main fruit and vegetable wholesale distribution center, representing 26 vendors. Not only have all of these organizations written letters to support the farm, they were also unaware of the work being done for these Caltrain stations. And part of the concern that I'm expressing is the concern that was expressed to me in collecting these letters. In addition, the volunteers of the Florence Fang Community Farm have collected up 497 petition signatures on paper, with an additional 195 electronic signatures from people who have been touched by the Florence Fang Community Farm. I just would like to read the beginning of the petition that these 497 people have signed. The headline says, "Don't threaten our farm." The Florence Fan Community Farm is the largest community farm in San Francisco. We are San Francisco's only USDA certified farm. Our community farm needs hundreds of families in the Bayview, and our community farm feeds hundreds of families in the Bayview and thousands of neighborhood residents. We are Bayview's homegrown, most successful effort at growing nutritious, healthy food. Bayview is a food desert. It is wrong and shameful to consider any actions that could harm the Florence Fan Community Farm. I say that as, so I just want to indicate that when we are concerned about harming the farm, and we're concerned that the communication was not done adequately to help us understand what was going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Teddy. I appreciate that and the fact that we had the opportunity to speak on the phone earlier this week. For the group, I wanted to note that back in February of 2020, Caltrain passed their rail corridor use policy, which looked at kind of adjacent parcels on and around the Caltrain right-of-way, of which the Florence Fan Community Farm is on one. And I attended the meeting where that policy was approved and was very impressed upon by the strong showing of the community in support of the Florence Fan Community Farm. So as I went into this work over the last couple of years, the community farm has been very much kind of on our radar regarding the Williams option. And we hope that we can provide any additional information about the Williams option, and note that it is not currently anticipated to impact the farm, but we appreciate kind of the community's mobilization and the feedback regarding this. Chad, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. And thanks, Teddy, for that detailed comment. I want to hold my comments about station options until we've heard a little bit more, but I wanted to maybe make a couple of comments. First of all, thank you for the outreach that you are doing. I'm hearing how it could be better. I think that Bayview's transportation plan that was completed a little over a year ago, it's a little hard to keep track, I think it was pre-pandemic, had extensive community engagement, and I really want to compliment SF Planning on all the detailed work they did on that. I wanted to raise a comment, and I think you can somewhat see it on this map. The neighborhoods that are a little lumped together here, but I might pull them apart a little more: Bayview, Silver Terrace, Hunters Point, India Basin, Bayview Hill, are almost an island off of San Francisco. They're separated on three sides by bodies of water, and they're cut off from the rest of the city in terms of pedestrian and bike access by highways and extensive warehouse districts. We really lack a lot of transportation options that connect us with the rest of the city. And we also lack a lot of transportation options that help us get around within the neighborhoods that we can function coherently. So I just like to make that comment that that's part of how we experience the neighborhood here. And I happen to live in the India Basin area. There's one question I wanted to ask up front. The study that suggested that we have a station in this large swath of the city that we'll just call Bayview for shorthand was done 16 years ago. And now we're talking about options again. I think it's really great that we're being thoughtful about this, but I'm wondering if we've already waited 16 years for a station that was already recommended, how much are we talking about waiting longer to do something by going through this review process? And can you give us any sense of timeline of where we're going to go with this? Thanks. And then if we're meant to talk about options later, I'll hold my comments for that.
Thank you so much for that comment, Chad. To answer your question about next steps for the Bayview, this round of work will conclude with a likely result that probably for the first time, all of the agencies of the city and county of San Francisco will unitedly recommend two options or two stations between 4th and King and Bayshore. So one at or near existing 22nd Street station, as well as a new Bayview station. So we've been talking about the Oakdale location for a long time. The Bayview CPTP kind of confirmed that preference, and then other long-range planning work through what's called Connect SF also recommended a new Bayview station. And so now that this study will likely end with that outcome, as well as a lot of feedback and detailed research about the pros and cons of the various station options, the 22nd Street station options, those three at the top, would continue with the Pennsylvania Avenue extension, and Jesse's going to talk about that in just a little bit. And then the Bayview options could move on to what we would almost term a bridge planning study, which will get it to readiness for environmental clearance. And so that will be looking at each option, starting or resuming a robust conversation with the Bayview, likely in 2022, and then starting to get to alternatives that we would want to take into environmental clearance and its attendant kind of need to seek funding to build the station itself. And so while the Pennsylvania Avenue Extension Tunnel and the attendant kind of changes to 22nd Street will follow the timeline for what really is a major mega project, a new Bayview station would work closely with Caltrain, the community, and any other pertinent stakeholders, as well as at the state, as needed to move ahead faster than that longer timeline. With that, unless we have any other comments, I will hand it over to Jesse to start the Dogpatch Potrero options discussion.
Great, thanks, Anna, and thanks for the feedback we've already received. So I'm going to speak a bit about the 3 station options in the Dogpatch and Potrero, and they include 3 locations along that future potential Pennsylvania Avenue tunnel alignment. A potential station at Mariposa Street, station options at 22nd Street, both the existing location or potentially a location within a PAX tunnel, and finally Cesar Chavez Street. Next slide. The Pennsylvania Avenue alignment is a future project, also known as PAX, that is intended to eliminate conflicts between trains and street users at existing surface crossings of the railroad at Mission Bay Drive and 16th Street. As we all know, 16th Street particularly is a major east-west travel corridor connecting Mission Bay to the rest of the city, including transit. With the implementation of the PAX project in the future, traffic would no longer need to wait while trains cross. The PAX project is still in early concept development, and funding, construction, and schedule will be determined in later phases of work. What we know so far is that the downtown rail extension tunnel would be extended south beneath 7th Street and continuing below Pennsylvania Avenue. This route was endorsed by the Mayor's Office and the Board of Supervisors in 2018, following the completion of the San Francisco Planning Department's rail yard alignment and benefits study. We don't yet know exactly how far south the PAX tunnel will extend, but it may require the redesign or relocation of the existing 22nd Street station. All of the scenarios currently under consideration include a station somewhere in this stretch of the corridor. Currently, the agency that I work for, the County Transportation Authority, is developing a planning study of the PAX project, looking at various options for the project. What's shown on screen is one of several options. You can see here that the PAX tunnel under this option would begin north of the 22nd Street station location. Other options would start closer to Cesar Chavez, and as I mentioned, would require significant changes or replacement of the 22nd Street station. Next slide. This slide summarizes some of the advantages and trade-offs of these three station locations, which I'll quickly go through. When thinking about a station at Mariposa, this station is farthest from the Bayview and therefore would have a nice station spacing, assuming the development of a station in the Bayview. The station site would serve existing 22nd Street riders, as well as Mission Bay, some of the new waterfront developments, as well as the Chase Center. Mariposa also offers access to major crosstown transit connections on 16th Street. The team did consider a station on 16th Street itself, but ultimately concluded that that would not be feasible due to the track alignment required to eventually connect to the downtown rail extension. Thinking about some of the cons of Mariposa, the ultimate compatibility of this location with the PAX tunnel's design is not yet known. The location is tricky because of the curve to the north, the freeway to the east, Potrero Hill to the south, and residential neighborhoods to the east. A Mariposa station would be located within the PAX tunnel and thus would be quite deep and thus rather expensive. At 22nd Street, there are a number of design alternatives. Depending on the PAX design, the 22nd Street station could remain in place beneath the freeway or be built in a deep tunnel similar to Mariposa. 22nd Street is familiar and already well integrated into the urban fabric, and it serves existing riders as well as new waterfront developments. The design option that would require rebuilding portions of the station in the current location would be significantly less expensive than building a new station within the tunnel at either 22nd Street or Mariposa. If PACs were not built at all, the station would stay in this location and the city would work with Caltrain to implement accessibility and customer improvements separately. I'll also note that regardless of the timing of the PACs project, Caltrain, working with the city, has studied nearer term improvements to the existing 22nd Street station to address the accessibility challenges at that location presently. Some of the disadvantages of 22nd Street include tunnel and station construction in the location, the underpass location in terms of its urban design, and the impacts of a potential consideration for locating 22nd Street in a future deep tunnel with the same trade-offs as a deep tunnel in Mariposa. Finally, thinking about Cesar Chavez, this location has a lower cost station option compared to the deep tunnel approaches, and it would serve some, but not all, of the existing 22nd Street ridership. On the other hand, Cesar Chavez would be difficult to access given its position between Potrero Hill, Islas Creek, and the I-280 freeway. It's also surrounded by large industrial uses with limited opportunity for pedestrian scale design. As Anna mentioned in an earlier slide, the location also has sea level rise concerns and would require a somewhat complex construction approach. Finally, Chavez is close to some of the potential Bayview station options, and thus would result in potentially result in spacing of stations that would not be as desirable from a train operations perspective. We'll now walk through a few images that give an idea for how these station options could fit into the neighborhood and how they might be designed. These all reflect preliminary ideas to spark our collective imagination. Next slide. First up is Mariposa. This image looks north toward downtown. The station would approximately be at the intersection of Mariposa and Pennsylvania on the west side of the freeway. It would be below ground to meet the deep PACs tunnel. Station depth would be similar to that of BART on Market Street. Next slide. Riders can access the station from 16th Street, 17th Street, and Mariposa, both east and west of the freeway. Next slide. Moving to 22nd Street, this station would be in the same general location as the existing station. As mentioned previously, there are a number of design alternatives at this location, each of which would work with one or more of the different potential PACs tunnel options. Next slide. This image shares one of those potential approaches, which would involve rebuilding the current station while improving accessibility and user experience. This view is from someone standing on the 22nd Street Bridge looking south away from downtown. The current station has side platforms. Under this approach, there would be a new center platform to serve passengers traveling in both directions. As explored in Caltrain's current 22nd Street ADA access study, this option would also add an elevator or ramps, as well as create a point of access from 23rd Street. Next slide. Finally, we'll move to Cesar Chavez. This station would straddle Cesar Chavez and Marin Streets just west of the 280 freeway. This image is looking towards Potrero and downtown from the south. Riders could access this raised station from Cesar Chavez or from Tunnel Top Park on 25th Avenue. The station will be difficult to squeeze between the Potrero Hill Tunnel and the I-280 freeway, but we think there is just enough space. And I think I now turn it back to Anna.
Thank you so much, Jesse. All right, let us talk about Bayview station options. So before diving into kind of these three options for a new station in the Bayview, I want to provide a little more background on the corridor history. I know that we have some kind of community members who are steeped in the history here. So if you have anything to add, please feel free to do so in the chat or in your comments later, because we want to make sure we capture as much as possible in this study and our outreach summary report. The Paul Avenue Caltrain station in the Bayview was closed in 2005. Several studies conducted prior to this closure explored alternative station locations. A 1988 study assessed the feasibility of replacing Paul Avenue with a new station to the north at either Williams Avenue, Paloux Avenue, or Evans, with Evans as a preferred location. A 2002 plan identified the Oakdale-Palouse area as the community's preferred location for a Caltrain station. A 2005 study proposed and confirmed the engineering feasibility of the new station just north of Oakdale Avenue, and subsequent work in 2014 confirmed the ridership potential of a Caltrain station in that location. As we previously mentioned, the recently completed Bayview Community-Based Transportation Plan, which thank you for your kudos on that, Chad. That was actually work completed by SFMTA, and I agree that it is a great example, and I've certainly learned a lot from reviewing it. The CBTP includes an Oakdale Caltrain station as one of the neighborhood's most pressing transportation needs. And San Francisco's long-range transportation planning effort, known as ConnectSF, also recommended a new station in the Bayview. So why are we looking at Williams and Evans when the Oakdale location was recommended in these most recent studies? As I talked about earlier in next steps, some of the next steps are in the process of building a new station is developing more detailed engineering and environmental studies to get us into and through environmental clearance. It's desirable to identify alternatives should a barrier arise to implementing a preferred site. Potential challenges include active freight spur tracks in the Oakdale and Williams station areas, providing pedestrian access to grade-separated platforms, the recent Quint Street Bridge replacement project, as well as considerations for seismic engineering. Another question that we often get is, why aren't we considering reopening Paul Avenue Station? The previous station at Paul had a short platform length and a curve in the track immediately to the north, which doesn't allow for providing the 1,000-foot length platform needed to serve future Caltrain train sets. Our initial study concluded that the potentially viable station options for a new Bayview station are at Evans Avenue, Oakdale Avenue, and Williams Avenue. Next slide, please. So similar to the table we looked at for the Dogpatch Potrero options, this shows kind of the positive and negative attributes generally for each station location. Some of the pros for Evans include that it's a surface station and hence lower cost than some of those deep tunnel options that Jesse mentioned earlier. It's also close to the future home of the new Southeast Community Center, which is being built at 3rd and Evans. Constraints at Evans include that the surrounding area is industrial. Its proximity to Islas Creek also means that it's vulnerable to rising seas. Their next option, Oakdale, has great attributes in that it is central to the Bayview with good connections to walking, biking, and bus networks. It's also the prior identified preference of the community. Some negatives for Oakdale are the freight spur to its east, as well as access from the surrounding streets. And then similarly for the third option, the positives for Williams are that it's central to the Bayview and quite close to the 3rd Street commercial corridor, and with good options to transfer to bus or light rail. And some negatives for Williams are that there is also a freight spur and access to below grade tracks is complicated to solve for. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit more about Evans. We didn't develop a set of images for Evans Avenue for a few reasons. One of these is that it faces many of the same challenges as Cesar Chavez and can be illustrated using the same images, which we can share if we want to kind of look further into that. Jesse had previously shown them on screen as well. Caltrain here is on the surface, but elevated above the surrounding streets via embankment or bridges over the streets themselves. It's also straddled by the I-280 structure and off-ramps, making pretty hard constraints to work around, as moving the freeway columns is not a likely possibility. As discussed in the table on the previous slide, Evans is located further from the core of the Bayview neighborhood than either Oakdale or Williams. It's surrounded entirely by industrial land uses. It's also in close proximity to Islas Creek with its attendant sea level rise and seismic challenges. We also want to point out that one of the original advantages of the Oakdale Avenue location was its proximity to the Southeast Community Facility, whose replacement is currently under construction at 3rd and Evans. However, a potential Caltrain station at Evans would be 2.5 blocks of walking through the Southeast Treatment Plant to reach the station from this future Southeast Community Center. This industrial use is a major piece of municipal infrastructure and not anticipated to move from the area. On the other side of the Caltrain alignment and I-280 lie the recently built SFPD facility at 1995 Evans, the challenging five-way intersection of Napoleon, Evans, and Toland, which are also major freight routes from Cesar Chavez to the SF produce market. All right, so let's take a look at these images that give an idea about how Oakdale or Williams could fit into the neighborhood and how they might be designed. These are all preliminary ideas. The Oakdale Station concept, located about 1 mile north of the former Paul Avenue station, includes a platform to the north of Oakdale. As we've noted, this location is the stated preference of the community over many years and many prior planning studies. It's fairly central to the Bayview community, although one side of it abuts more industrial land uses than residential or commercial. And also the width of Oakdale and the quality of its transportation amenities, including bike lanes, bus service, and parking, make it a good place to connect to regional rail. Looking north towards downtown on this slide, the station would be an open air station, but would be below street level where the tracks currently are today. This presents challenges similar to those at existing 22nd Street station in that long ramps or elevators would be needed to reach the platforms from the street. Other complexities include the soil conditions under the tracks and freight right-of-way and the active spur track seen here on the right. A separate Quint Gerald Connector Road project will reestablish a connection between Oakdale Avenue and Gerald Avenue via a new road along the west side of the Caltrain tracks. Riders could access the station from Gerald, Quint, and Oakdale. All right, and next is Williams. The Williams Station concept includes a platform to the south of the tunnel portal on the other side of the hill from Oakdale Avenue, extending under and south of Williams Avenue. This site is located within a residential neighborhood and along a commercial corridor with the community farm above the tunnel portal to the north there. Bus service on Williams gives a local transit connection to regional rail, and the 3rd Street commercial corridor and the light rail line T3rd is also a short walk away. This location also has a freight spur track to deal with. Looking north towards downtown here, riders would access the station from Williams Avenue, Egbert Avenue, and Carroll Avenue. The storage units west of the Caltrain tracks would likely need to be relocated. Just like Oakdale and 22nd Street, this station concept would require long ramps or elevators to be accessible. The Florence Fang Community Farm would not be impacted by the proposed design. All right, so that are the concept sketches. Sorry that we ran through them quickly, but we had originally planned to do them separately in breakout rooms. We are a small group, so we're happy to move into our Q&A section. Jesse and I can take questions. We also have Caltrain staff on the line. Feel free to put your questions in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question verbally, as we are a small group today. And staff and others, please let me know if there's any questions from the chat that you'd like us to address. Go ahead, Chad.
Hi, thanks for all these detailed thoughts. It's helpful to understand a little bit better what's going on here. I guess I have a couple of comments about what was said, and then ultimately I'll ask a question about one of the design options for Oakdale. I guess this isn't really as much of a question it sounds like, but it sounds like one of the compelling arguments for having an Evans location is being able to walk to the Southeast Community Center. I'm not really sure why that makes any sense. Like, is the notion that people are going to be transporting themselves into Bayview to come to the center that's being built for the Bayview community because of the wastewater treatment plant that's there? It seems like a relatively weak argument, and that seems like one of the more compelling ones, and I just felt like pointing that out. I don't see it. I also think that the measurement from the tracks to there and calling it 2 blocks is a little ridiculous, because one of those blocks is the entire length of the Southeast wastewater treatment plant, which would put it hundreds of yards long. So it's not close at all. And there's no meaningful transit access there. I do strongly favor the Oakdale location because it connects with all the major bus lines that are coming in and out of Bayview, as well as the T and Mendel Plaza, and people could easily walk from one to the other. That is only about 1 block to 2 blocks. My question as part of the Oakdale redesign, the Newcomb Avenue terminates at Phelps Avenue, and is at grade with the what would be the tracks and the platform for an Oakdale station, has the option of creating a path from the end of Newkdale at Phelps been considered to avoid some of the complications that you're raising about the Oakdale location, instead of focusing on Oakdale having only ingress and egress from Oakdale?
Great point, Chad. And I had also noticed that in other members of the team when we've walked around the site before. It's definitely been brought up as a potential option. We would need to talk with PUC and City College and other stakeholders just to kind of see about access through that area. But it certainly makes a lot of sense trying to get a better at-grade access to the tracks through the surrounding parcels. So we will certainly explore that and document it as something that needs further exploration in the next phase. Teddy, you have a question.
Yes, I had a similar question in Evans Avenue, although I guess it's a little bit in the other direction, which is that I have heard a lot of support in the community for the Evans Avenue station. And I guess my question was, you also mentioned that have people said that they want it there because of the Southeast Community Center being built there, or is that just an assumption?
So not an assumption, but the people that I have heard from directly about this are policymakers. And so they may have heard it from the community, but it is something that was passed on to me by other policymakers as something we should look at. Jesse, did you want to add anything about this piece?
Nothing further from what you said. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Tom Fisher. I'm sorry, I can't raise my hand because I'm on my phone. Is it all right if I ask a question?
Absolutely, please go ahead.
Hi, so I live in the Bayview as well. I'm on Newcomb Avenue, and I like the idea of the Oakdale station, not just because I think it would be easy, but my question is, I'm strongly putting my preference towards that, but my question is about the building that is next to the proposed station there. Is there the possibility, and I know it's owned by the PUC, but is there the possibility, or has it been looked at, to use that building as some form of station that would be like the ability to have businesses or some form of other community engagement for the station itself, rather than just having a platform? Because I really think that that building is not as well used, especially if we're going to have the new community center online on Evans in the very near future. Has it been looked at to have some form of alignment with the PUC to use that building as like not just what it's used as currently, but also part of the station itself, so it can have businesses or any kind of other community aspect that could be involved that would actually benefit the surrounding area?
So great question, and thank you for it. So we have talked quite a bit about kind of the location of this building, as well as the kind of attributes of Oakdale that make, by kind of the confluence of having what is essentially a community facility, as well as a really good, well laid out street that makes it a good location for a station. Additional conversations would need to be had about with PUC and City College potentially about their future plans for the building, but I think it's a great idea. We will be presenting to the Southeast Community Facility Commission, I believe in early December, but I'd be happy to follow up with anybody on this call to let you know exactly when that would be. I will summarize that comment at that presentation, but if others would like to attend and kind of make those comments or email them to me and I can represent them there, I think that would be a great start to a conversation with them. Jesse or Taylor, feel free to let me know if there's any questions I'm missing in the chat.
Let me give it another scan. There's a lot here. Some of it is comments.
Yep, and we'll be saving the chat. The way we plan to present our outreach summary report is unless you let us know otherwise, we plan to anonymize comments and then represent all of your comments in our outreach summary. Bonnie, you have your hand up.
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Of course, I'm interested, since I work at Tunneltop Park. How, I know you mentioned that station on Cesar Chavez could be accessed via Tunneltop Park, but how would that station build out affect Tunneltop Park? or would it at all? In terms of any kind of physical changes to the park?
I'm gonna start, hand that one to you, Jesse.
Sorry, I admit to having reading a comment in the chat while that came in, but I believe that the question was about how might a station at Chavez affect the Tunnel Top Park specifically.
As well as the construction of PACs potentially.
Got it. So the extent of any impact with respect to PACs would depend on which PACs alternative is ultimately selected should the project move forward. One of the options under consideration would have a portal in the vicinity of the existing tunnel portal beneath Tunnel Top Park. And so construction of the new project would result in some activity in the vicinity of that location. The PACs project, as it advances, would be expected to go through an environmental review process, with any designs contemplated through that process being subject to the full gamut of technical studies to determine the scope and nature of any impacts and what mitigations would be required. With respect to impacts specifically on Tunnel Top Park, there's no expectation for either the PACs project or the Cesar Chavez station that there would be a direct impact on the property. As we noted in the presentation, if a station were constructed at Chavez, we would want to work with the community through later stages of design to determine whether and how and in what fashion there would be an ability to make pedestrian connections from the north end of that station up the Potrero Hill in the vicinity of the Tunnel Top Park, and that would be the subject of later design work.
Okay, all right, thank you. I have a question about access in terms of when you look at these different options in terms of the three on Potrero Hill. Did you come up with, or have people weighed in about what station they feel like is easier for the public coming from both sides of like Dogpatch and Potrero Hill to access in terms of, you know, equitable access actually?
Go ahead, Jesse.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you for the comment question. We've heard a variety of perspectives on that point and would welcome input from anyone on the meeting today. Of course, because it is an existing location, the 22nd Street station is relied upon and used by both regular commuters and others who use the Caltrain corridor and who rely on it for their daily commute. Others have expressed an interest in the Mariposa location, given that particularly if a station were also to be constructed in the Bayview, that the Mariposa station would have good connections into the Mission Bay and some of the communities that are parts of the Dogpatch and Potrero that are a little bit further north. So there are certainly differing opportunities and impacts of all the locations with all the attendant trade-offs. The final thing I'll add is that on the Cesar Chavez location, and the immediate adjacent land use is not generally particularly transit oriented. That's not to say that a station, particularly a regional rail station, were it to be constructed in that location, the supporting bus network and pedestrian and bicycle network would need to be appropriately developed to provide access to that location for passengers from other parts of the surrounding areas.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and I just want to voice my support for extensive outreach within the Bayview. And you had mentioned, and I just want to make sure I heard it right, that you're going to start doing additional outreach to involve more of the community starting in 2022. Is that correct? So there'll be no other additional meetings for the rest of this year, but starting up in the beginning of next year?
Hi, Bonnie. Just a clarification on that. There will be a subsequent phase of this work that will be specifically about advancing the new Bayview station, likely starting in 2022, and it will involve a broader and kind of more robust community outreach portion. It will be easier to do community outreach once we are out of the pandemic, and also that next phase definitely requires it. However, within this work, which we're hoping to complete early next year, we're also going to be taking hard copy packets to community-based organizations so they can have them in their facilities if they'd like, with the option to provide written comments. And we also had a great suggestion at our Thursday session to provide those same types of packets at public libraries in Bayview, Hunters Point. Teddy, you have your hand up, and then Taylor, if you, once Teddy asks this question and we answer it, I'd like to share the slide with the relative distances between station options, and I'm happy to do that. I have it up.
I just want to reiterate that the Bayview is the most diverse neighborhood of San Francisco, and unfortunately, you cannot tell that from the attendance at these meetings. And so I just want to make sure that when you do the summary of the findings for these meetings, that you do indicate the lack of participation of people of color as far as coming to any conclusions about what the community wants.
Absolutely, Teddy. Thank you for that point. All right, Taylor, do you mind stopping sharing for just a moment, and I'll share my screen? Oh, you've got it. Oh, great. Thank you so much. So Chad, this is to your question about the relative differences between the station options. Working with our partners at Caltrain, the kind of minimum distance between a station pair in their existing system is approximately a mile. It's not a hard rule, but it's one that they recommended to us, that we should look at any options that are closer together than a mile. Go ahead, Donovan.
Thanks, Anna. Just wanted to, second or third or fourth the need for continued additional outreach, obviously for the Bayview Hunters Point area and for those neighborhoods. Want to thank you personally for all the work that you're doing and continued outreach in throughout District 10, because I guess these are all in District 10. And then also wanted to just reiterate kind of something you've heard from us before, which is, or for me, I think that one of the things that I saw it on the map earlier with regards to the density, particularly around 22nd Street, but I think it kind of gets lost a little bit with the circles. But these are how many people are coming, or these are how many people the developments are. I think it's important to note that the density that is occurring. The Southeast neighborhoods have seen a ton of growth. Dogpatch has seen, Dogpatch and Mission Bay have seen some of the most in terms of, and we're going to see a lot more. So, it's really important, at least from my perspective. I'm a big proponent of 22nd Street because I think it does a couple of things that are important. One, it helps to connect a number of the disadvantaged communities that are already in the neighborhood, right? But folks who already exist here who have not had a lot of great transportation options, and then there are a lot of other folks coming to the neighborhood. So I think that those are important to note. And I've seen it in a couple of the comments. Cesar Chavez and Mariposa are not particularly easy places to get to. If you are on foot, on a bicycle, on any of the other multimodal types of transportation that we are dependent on, if we are going to get away from our addiction to some of the other to cars. So I think that those are some important notes. And just finally, one other comment is that Anna will be at the Dogpatch Neighborhood Association on Tuesday. So appreciate you joining us there. And if anyone else wants to attend, we'll have an even smaller group to talk and ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donovan. I will also be speaking with Friends of Caltrain at 6 p.m. on Monday. If anybody would like a link to that meeting, I'd also be happy to provide that. I kind of to add on to your comment, Donovan, about 22nd Street, something that we've heard from many people is that, including some of the major institutional stakeholders in the area and people that live and work around 22nd, is that we have these major developments coming or already online in Pier 70, in Mission Bay, in the Potrero power station, that kind of were built and approved with regional rail access at 22nd in mind. And so looking at alternatives to that really needs to take that into account as well. As you all will have seen from all of these maps and the conversation, and we will see from our final report, is that we've done a lot of thinking about these various station options, how they interact with each other, with the city, and with the Caltrain system as a whole. Obviously, there's always more work to be done, and we've learned, recently and within the last week that we can always do better. And something that is important to us at the planning department, we received a charge from our commission last year to center our work program around racial and social equity, and we must do better. And so we will work hard to incorporate your comments about making sure that we do more and better and different and appropriate outreach to the Bayview, both in finishing out this phase as well as planning for the next steps in implementing a new Bayview station. We are at 1:15. I just wanted to make sure that we capture any additional comments or questions. Would anybody like to say anything else before I thank you all for coming?
Anna, there were a few Caltrain and 22nd Street specific questions in the chat. Maybe I can address really quickly.
Absolutely, please, thank you. And all this is Nick Atchison with Caltrain, who's on the 22nd Street Station ADA access study. Thanks, Nick.
Great, thanks, Anna. So the first question I saw, and I apologize if this was answered in the chat, there's a lot going on in there. But somebody asked about how many people were using the existing 22nd Street station today. I know that prior to the pandemic, we were carrying a bit over 1,800 riders per weekday. That's for the whole weekday. And the question also asked about kind of the split between AM boardings and PM boardings. I don't have that exact data, but I can tell you that the vast majority of people were getting on trains that were going south and getting off trains that were going north. And there were more people who were using the station to commute south than were commuting into the station for work or otherwise. Then we also had a question related to when we can expect the accessibility improvements at 22nd Street Station. And right now, our study that Caltrain is doing, looking at the different options for creating ADA access at the existing station, we're estimating that it'll take about 2.5 to 3-ish years to design and build the alternatives that we're exploring. However, there is not currently a dedicated funding source for those improvements, and that timeline that we've identified in our study doesn't account for the time that it would take to find and secure funding for those improvements. That'll all be detailed in our final report, which we're going to be completing and releasing in the next few months. And we'll be taking that to the JPB board next month, as well as the SFCTA board early 22 for final approval. Thanks.
Hi, Chad. Your question's in the chat, but we do have time. Would you like to go ahead and ask it verbally?
Sure, that's really your pleasure, Anna. Thank you. The previous slide where we're analyzing the potential demographics around the stations has a smaller radius than the 2005 study. It was the previous one that's got the multicolored circles around the state. Yeah, this one. My recollection was the 2005 study that considered the Oakdale station was looking at potential significant ridership from neighborhoods like Bernal that don't seem to be captured here. And also a large amount of the growth in the Southeast, it's anticipated where the shipyard was and where Candlestick Park was. That's well outside of this, but it's anticipatable in the near future. So can you comment at all about how those neighboring communities, in particular, the potential growth is figured in, given that this says developed land use and has a much smaller field of vision?
Absolutely, great question. Thank you, Chad. I think it's one that we should incorporate into our scoping for the next phase about the new Bayview station. We use these 1 mile radii just as a kind of rule of thumb as we created these comparative graphics. I realize that a circle is just a geometric shape and may not actually have relevance in terms of kind of giving us an accurate picture, but it is how we kind of drew our project constraints and how we would compare and contrast. I think one thing to note here is that the community's preference for Oakdale, as well as the ridership justifications for Oakdale, are definitely well documented, and I would say definitely established at this point. I also know that Oakdale as a station concept, as well as a kind of community priority, really did kind of come out of this need to restore that regional rail access and also provide additional mobility options, given the large increase in density that we're going to see, as you noted, in kind of India Basin and the shipyard areas. So good point. And I think in the next phase, we should look beyond a simple radius.
Anna, this is Taylor, and if I could just add briefly, the good news is we do have many figures that we've prepared that look at, this is a half-mile radius, and we have some that also look at a full mile. We've also prepared walk and bicycle access sheds, which are not the geometric circles, but get at, mobility barriers. So we will add all of those to our final report. And then this is a really helpful comment, so that in the next phase of work, we will continue to look at a larger sphere of influence when we think about the station options. Looking at a more narrow sphere of influence is kind of a more helpful scale at which to understand more directly, like land use impacts to a station. So we'll continue to have both. Thanks.
Thanks, Taylor, and thanks, Chad. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me or at the project email, which I am now able to fully access. I'm glad that we resolved the issue with that. I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your input. We appreciate your criticism, and we also appreciate any comments about what we're doing well. If you have any more comments or questions, the email is cpc.serss@sfgov.org. We'll be compiling the stakeholder feedback and incorporating it into our final report for SERS, or this Southeast Rail Station Study, which we anticipate by completing by early 2022. Keep an eye on our project website for updates. We'll be posting these recordings, slide decks, and then our draft and final reports. That's at sfplanning.org/SERSS. With that, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. Thank you all.